Hello everyone, I am Sequence6, and this is my production walkthrough of Mewali, my new single on Pure Trance Neon. This is personally my favorite record that I've ever released, and for anybody that doesn't know the meaning behind the name, Mewali comes from the language Bahasa Bali, or the language of Bali, Indonesia, which is a very, very special place to me. Going there changed my life and taught me a lot about myself, and the phrase directly translates to "you're welcome," which has multiple meanings to me because I've never felt more welcomed as a human being than I have in Bali. It is the most kind, open, and embraceful place I have ever been. And additionally, it's just a response that is often used in my life. So it was very, very fitting. Anyway, let's jump into the production walkthrough. But before I go into the super detailed sections, for anyone who has not heard the track and just kind of randomly clicked on this video, I'm going to play you a snippet of the song. So as you can hear, it's very uplifting, it's very bright, it's also really energetic and hard-hitting, so it's just very much the sound that I'm known for. But there's something really unique about this track and the way that I layered it. It's just such a special track to me, so I'm really excited to show it to you. So let's jump in. As you can see, it's a very colorful screen. I like to color code everything, and we're gonna work our way from the top down. So first things first, this is an automation clip, and it's simply just the volume on the master output. And you can see that there's little dips here. These are just to enhance the impact of certain sections of the track. So the whole track is actually being turned down slightly, just by like 1 to 2 dB. And then it gets brought back up when the kick comes in major points. So this happens before bar 33 when the sub bass kicks in, happens here after the first break, it happens into the break, it happens into the main drop, and then in the sections where I'm filtering things in the drop, and then also into the outro section here. So if you haven't tried that in your own tracks, that's a little quick tip that I think is really helpful. Now we're going to jump into the leads themselves. This automation clip is for sidechain. I use LFO tool for sidechain, so that is also going to turn on as soon as the kick is coming in, but I don't like using the kick as like a router for sidechain. Like I don't do sidechain compression very often because I think it sounds kind of weird. I don't know. I've tried it. Not my thing. But yeah, let's listen to the leads on their own. There's 3 layers here. There's this one, which is actually an acid. And that is layer 1. It's lower in the mix. It's panned a little bit right. We've got the new FL Studio plugin emphasizer on it. It's just the standard setting, but I felt with it off, it didn't sound as bulky. We've got a Pro Q on linear phase mode, so it doesn't mess with the phase of the sound at all. And we're rolling off at 75 Hertz, which is also, I'm gonna pause this real quick and make a note. You'll consistently see D sharp on the EQ. The reason for that is because the key is D sharp. So I like to EQ by key. The reason for this is because everything that we're working with here is frequencies that are tonal. This is a very melodic track, and you know, we don't want to accidentally go a little too far or a little too little on our EQing. So just a way of reference for me personally is just EQing within the key. If I need it to roll off around the 2nd octave, I'll just aim for D sharp if I'm in D sharp, or F if I'm in F, or G if I'm in G, and so on. We're boosting up here where it sounded right to me by 2.83 dB. That's not a really scientific thing, just what felt right. And then we've got a 1-knob filter, which is just doing some filtering for me on that synth. Next up is actually the main lead from Essence of Self. It's the exact same sound. It's like, I've used this in so many tracks now, and it just works every single time. It's very airy, and that sounds like this. Well, when it's filtered down, it sounds like that. Now it's open. This has an incredible plugin on it by Chris Lord-Alge called Mixdown. And this is just a great way to work with frequencies in a very simple interface. I had a Pro Q on, boosting it, but I actually switched to Mixdown instead, so you can hear what it was before. It was like this. And it was just too bright. So I felt the emphasis, instead of it being on like the super high highs, it needed to be on kind of the, what this calls treble, which is more towards like the mid-high frequency range than my EQ was. So, and then also a one knob filter on that. I think, you know, you could just do one knob on like the individual sounds like I've done, or you can just do it on the bus if you don't want to work with the cutoff in the actual synth. This, I just wanted a lot of control, so I kept doing it on every single sound. But this last lead, this is a really, really, really nice sound. This is like one of my favorite sounds ever. It's designed by Dave Parkinson. So I saved it into my favorites here. This is also the first track in probably 8 years that I've used Mag EQ. I always disliked this plugin, and I don't remember using it, but I bought it because somebody recommended it to me, and I was super excited, and then I used it, and I was like, wow, this doesn't sound very good. But apparently it sounded good on this track. So if you have it, and you're working with a lead that's really plucky, the air band will work. If you're working with something really, really airy, it hasn't worked for me. But this time it did. Then I also have my very, very standard processor that I use for pretty much everything, which is the linear phase multiband compressor, but I kind of use it as an EQ, and then it like naturally compresses itself. It's very fun. So you can kind of watch this work. It's like barely moving, barely compressing, but mostly used as like a mid boost. But when it hits a certain threshold, these thresholds right here, it starts to kind of tone down the sound with compression in linear phase mode, which is really, really nice. So those are all the leads on their own, individually, and then all together they sound like this, beautifully layered. And we've got some interesting processing going on here. So 20% merged towards mono, because I felt they were just a little bit too wide. Then we've got an EQ. This is off, so that's probably useless. I could have deleted that. This is the basic shaping EQ that I designed for this. Dynamic EQ around 220, just kind of getting rid of that boom of the bottom notes. You can hear that humminess a little bit. When I turn this on, it's more under control. It's a boost up at just over 6,000. If I turn that off, it's a little hollow. Now it's bright. Next EQ is pretty similar. This one's just taming some mid resonances and more of the boom again, and then brightening the whole thing at D sharp 8, so on the 8th octave. Then we've got H comp stereo, which is also doing some work on compression and also on tone, because this analog knob, this does something, and I never read the manual, so I don't exactly know what, but trust me, use your ears. But I'll give you an example. I'll turn this off. If I go back to 3, there's just this shine, and it's different on each notch. That's a little bit more mid-highs. So they all sound a little different, but I like the third setting for this. And this is only just under 20% wet, so you're not getting like a lot of compression out of this, just enough. It's sort of running in its own version of parallel mode. Then we've got this handy plugin, the Ozone 9 Maximizer. No, I have not updated to Ozone, is it 12? I don't remember, but I'm happy with where I am. This is a fantastic maximizer plugin. You can really push sound into this without it distorting. And then if there is a little bit of clipping or distortion that happens, sometimes it's very pleasant and can be used to your advantage. On this, it's just barely hitting. And then LFO tool for sidechain. Next up is going to be this pluck that I just called hook. It complements the other melodies and kind of hints at the general vibe of the track in the intro. This also comes from Spire, and it's a really simple pluck. It's just beautiful, and I didn't really need to do much to it. Super simple EQ, just boosted the mids at around 1,400. And then I did one knob filter per usual. SSL compression, which this is a great SSL. I really love that plugin. It's not doing much work, but it is keeping it in check. And then we have an LFO tool as well. This is also routed to a lot of different things. So it's routed to parallel compression, which I'm using the API for that. Same setting I've used for years. It's also routed to a delay, a reverb, and my mono send. Now, mono sends, I haven't really heard people talk about these much, but I think that they are incredibly useful. And they are the key to not overlayering my sounds. I think I want more all the time out of a lot of the synths that I use. I want more punch. I want more emphasis without it being harsh. And so I've set up a mono send in most of my tracks now where I just kind of take off the lows. I boost in the mids, mid-highs somewhere, and sometimes I roll off the highs. This time it didn't need it, but any sound that's just not quite doing it, but I don't want to layer it with anything else, I just send it to a mono send at like 50 to 70%, and then it just kind of sits there and bulks up the sound and really makes it sound big and emphasized without having to use anything else. I think the leads are also sent to that. They are. Those are sent at 85%, so that I went a little bit harder, but it's amazing. Like if you I wasn't going to go back to the leads, but I'm going to go back to them now, and I'm going to show you what it sounds like without this. It sounds great, but as soon as I turn this on, it just hits you. And I know people do this with vocals all the time, but no producer that I've talked to has told me to do that with synths. So I don't know. I tried it one day and I have never gone back. Now, the pads, we'll move on to those next. It's pads and atmospheres because I felt like they were both really important to kind of shine together. And everything on its own, like this is really what makes the track to me, is this. It's so beautiful. It's like every time I hear this, I'm just so proud of what I created. And the thing is, like what inspired this specifically, these really shiny vocal pads, which we'll get to in a minute, is the sun rays that I saw in Bali. When I was there, I will never forget. When I got there super jet lagged, couldn't sleep past 4 a.m. I would just wake up, it would be dark, and I would watch the sunrise. And it was raining the first day, and when the sun finally broke through the clouds, I'd never seen sun rays like it. And there were a lot of moments on the trip where I was seeing sun rays that were just so big and so shimmery. And if you don't know this about me, as soon as I see something and it's impactful, I wonder, like, what would that sound like? And my brain starts working. And this is exactly what it would sound like. So I was just really struck by these samples, and I needed to use them and craft them into something where they all work together to create that image in my head, that image and experience that I had already had in Bali, and to just really take myself back there with the sound, which I feel I achieved. So we're gonna start again top down here with the pads. These are 3 layers. This section right here. And these are all filtering. So they're all from, well, I was about to say they're all from Spire, but they're not. This pad I've been using for 10 years and I haven't changed it. It is from Synth and it's perfect. So that's the name. When it opens, it's just massive. I mean, this is all of them layered, but I'll solo that just so you can hear it. There's no processing on the individual sound at all. And then the next one, this one's a little bit more fuzzy. And textured. And then the next one is probably the prettiest of them. And this one comes from Spire, and it's just so soft and so inviting, and honestly kind of reminds me of like synthwave stuff from like the Midnight, which is my favorite band. I just love that tone, and it's just nice to kind of add that in as a layer. Then we've got everything on the actual bus itself, which this EQ is very intense. Now it takes out minus 20 dB of the frequency D6, and that's because I felt like it was really resonant. So I dipped it out. I'll turn off all the processing so you can hear what these pads were like before. If you hear that kind of like single tone resonance that's happening as the notes change, and you really focus on that, as soon as I click this back on, it will kind of start to disappear. There are still some resonant frequencies in there somewhere, but they weren't super intense, so I didn't mind them. But the one at D6 I did mind. Then I boosted at B6, and this is by 6 dB. That's really adding a lot of texture, so if I disable that, you'll hear that it's a lot softer. But I wanted some of that intensity. Then we've got Saturn, which is making it even more intense on a warm tape mode, and it's at 49% drive, so it's pushing it a bit. And then I've boosted the mids and the trebles by a little over 3 dB. One knob filter per usual, sidechain, very normal. And one more EQ that just took off the lows at 130. I felt like some of these were coming up. Even though it doesn't really look like it, it just sounded better with it, so I kept it on. Now, after those, we have our vocal pads, which I will go through on their own. These are the ones that remind me of the sun rays. These are sent quite a few places, so all my sends over here on this side. The first vocal pad is sent to this super reverb, like super long reverb, I mean. It's 14.75 seconds. Then there's an LFO tool, which only sidechains things when the kick is happening. I don't really like when things are sidechained during the breakdown, if there's no kick. This is an EQ, again, that's kind of just keeping things contained in the mid-highs. I didn't want too much shine on the top end because I wanted to accommodate the shininess of this, which I know I toned this down too, but it's still really shiny. And this one's actually sent to a delay, which is pretty fun. Delay on pads is not something that I usually do, but I mean, you can really do anything in music production that you want. So I wanted to have fun with it. And it's an atmosphere, and you can see on the kind of the waveform here that there's a lot of dips and valleys, and the delay kind of just enhances this flow to the sound that I really like. And then the third one comes in. That's like a really recognizable sound in this track. It's pretty loud in the mix too. And I had a bunch of processing on this. I decided not to have any of it except this EQ, which is barely doing anything. And then I dipped off some of the highs and mids because it was just a little too bright still. And then that's also sent to my atmospheric doubles, which this has got a wild looking EQ on it, but I just wanted only part of it to be fully doubled and the other part to be kind of toned down. I just really like EQing things, and so I use EQ all the time and just play around with it until things sound right to me. Manipulating frequencies is just really fun. So the last part of this is the subpad. Which is just beautiful, and it's the exact same subpad that I've used since Saikang. I don't think there's been a track I've done, on my own at least, that has not had this subpad. I know my collaboration with Amos and Riot Knight, that was not this pad. He chose the pad in that, but every solo release I've done, it's been this. So this sound just continues to work. And I literally load up the exact same subpad channel strip that I have used since Saikung. I designed it and it worked, and then I just literally just moved these frequencies around to be in the right key. And then the wild card really is just whether or not I do an extra boost down here, which I did this time because I just wanted a little bit more of the subbiness out of it. It's also got a imager to make sure that the lowest lows are in mono, and then it's also got a maximizer that's just making sure it keeps the volume in check, and then a balance plugin to do some automation. Next up is the piano, which I absolutely adore. And piano is something that I think is really a core point in the tone of this record. Like, I could just listen to just the piano and I would be happy. The piano comes from Contact's Alicia's Keys, which I've been told is her actual piano. Like, it's live recordings from that, and you can literally just write in your own MIDI with this piano, and it sounds incredible. As you can see on the MIDI, I wanted to make sure that it was somewhat human, that it felt like it was being played in terms of the tonality, but I also wanted everything to be on the beat. So there's no actual humanization as many people would suggest I do. I want everything like on the grid, on the snap, but I have slight differences in note length, and then the major difference is just in the velocity or volume of each individual note that I craft individually by hand. I want to make sure it's exactly where I want it per note, and it turns out really nicely that way. I think the most important thing about making your piano sound good is truly just what reverb you use, because if I turn this off, yes, it sounds good, but it sounds a little bit clunky. But if I turn on the reverb, automatically it shimmers into the distance, and that's what we want. So we've got a little bit of a pre-delay, 16 milliseconds. The mix is at 36%, meaning it's 36% wet. So you're still getting some of that intense, like kind of pedally, finger clunky noise to make sure that you hear the transients of the notes. And then a 16-second decay time on the reverb itself. Then we EQ after the reverb always, because that helps shape the reverb a little bit. But this EQ isn't really doing much. I have two mixer channels though, meaning that there's two separate pianos. I think they're the same exact setting though. Let's double check. They are. Both audience, big concert hall, audience being, that's where they recorded with the mic. So you're getting a little bit of time between like the note being played and the reverb and the decay time of the note. It's coming from the audience's perspective is how you're hearing it. There's so many great settings in there, and I could talk about this all day because I love this plugin, but I will stop it there and just suggest that you go buy it if you don't already have it. The high piano though, this has slightly different processing. So it's the same exact reverb, but the EQ, I wanted to kind of do a high shelf, bring it up a little bit. This is just brightening the sound. If I turn it off, you'll hear. Just adds a little bit of shine, and I think it's more adding shine to the reverb than it is to the actual notes, but it just sounds really nice. So that is the piano, and next we'll move on to the acids. There are quite a few in this track, and the kind of main acid that you hear is this one. And that is just kind of being slightly manipulated by a filter cutoff automation that you can see here, and it just kind of ebbs and flows around the track. After that, this one comes in and layers with it. And I believe both of these sounds are from Spire. Yes, they both are. Yeah. And you know, you could automate the resonance on these if you wanted. That would be fun. I often do that in my tracks. But this time it was just filter cutoff. This one actually doesn't even have any automation, only the acid bus filtering, which kind of filters everything down. at certain moments. Then we've got this, which is not really an acid. It's more percussive, but it fits in the same kind of frequency range as the acids, and so I really liked the tone, and so I kind of just processed it along with those. The other sounds are going to be this one here. And this next one, which really drives the track along as well. So all of them together just kind of fit like puzzle pieces. They play off of each other, and when there's one gap in one of the samples of acid, the actual synth work that I've created as well on top of those samples kind of fills in those gaps. And then all the movement is just done by automation, or by the actual kind of rhythm itself in the synth. The processing on these, I'm pretty sure, is very simple. So the first acid that you hear, it's just adding some grit on the top end with EQ. Second one, there's nothing. The third one, again, just simple roll off. These also just have simple EQing, just a little bit taming some frequencies just above, just in the 6th octave, taming some highs, and a very similar thing here, a dynamic EQ kind of dipping at A#4. Now, on the actual acid bus, this is where everything kind of changes. So if I just loop these acids soloed, you'll hear how drastic of a difference it makes when I have the processing on. Versus off. Now, if you look closely, it's peaking around the same volume, but it's way louder with the processing on. And so I'm going to walk you through what I did. Firstly is a very simple EQ, just mild shaping. Probably didn't even need this, but I did it anyway. This is the main thing that is super important in this processing chain. This maximizer, which you've seen already multiple times in this video, is doing so much work. It is really crushing this sound. Like, it's actually adding a ton of grit. And it's like over limiting the sound, over clipping it. It's adding grit on the top end of these acids. And so I use this a lot because I want very little dynamic range on the bus of acids. I want them to kind of all just glue together a lot of the time. And a great way to do that is just by really smashing it into a maximizer. It will add distortion or some sort of grit oftentimes, but there's really nothing wrong with that. Oftentimes we would be putting that on top of acids anyway. So that's just my method. Next up is LFO tool, simple sidechain. After that, one knob filter, which, you know, I probably don't need to continue opening those. An EQ I turned off, and then balance plugin, which just is probably used for automation. I haven't opened this project in a while, so I don't remember. But yeah, that's all for the acids. So we'll move straight on to the kick and bass. The kick itself sounds like this. It's quite chunky. And, you know, I actually usually do a little fade on the end of these, but I guess I didn't in this track. It sounded good without that. But I did pitch it up one semitone just to fit the key of the track. So this kick was already really banging, but I decided to add, as you can see, quite a few EQs, all doing subtle things. So roll off at 36 hertz, boost at D#2, boost at D#4, and then a slight lift on the 8th octave. Then we have another EQ. This one's just used for automation to roll off the low end frequencies. Then there's a boost at B4. This just was the kind of knock that it needed. If I turn that off, you'll hear the difference. It just adds a little bit more slam to the kick drum. Then we have this for volume automation again, an imager that just makes the 700 hertz and below mono, and then a filter plugin again. Then our sub bass. This is really, like, I think the key to most of my tracks is the kick and sub relationship. They're just so warm and punchy. And I've used the same sub bass in almost every track that I have released in the past couple years. So this is the EQ on the sub. It's a roll off at 24 Hertz, and then a boost at D sharp 2, boost at G sharp 2, and boost at C sharp 3, and then another roll off at 700 Hertz. Now, these boosts, where I did them, was specifically so that during the bass changes, the sub wouldn't ever feel like it was kind of falling out and losing power, because it goes quite high in the MIDI. I'll show you. There it is. It goes up a whole octave to D sharp 5, and we're starting at D sharp 4. So without that EQ, it just didn't really feel that punchy when it goes up. Kind of loses the subbiness. So with this, you still feel that. But additionally, I wanted to add even more low end, so I added this plugin, which is very underrated. If you don't have it and you're struggling to get sub frequencies right, I'd recommend it. It's called BX Sub Filter by Plugin Alliance. And then the only thing you're going to need to do is compensate how loud it's going to get by turning the gain out. I usually don't mess with the amount of low end that it's adding in. I just find the frequency that feels right, and then I take the actual full volume down. And what it's doing is it's boosting a lot of those sub frequencies, and it does it in a way that really allows the sound to stay intact. I think usually it works for me. You can hear how much more subby that is. That's got more mid-range. That's got more sub frequencies. And sure, I probably could have done that with EQ, but this is already boosted quite a lot, and I just like how this plugin functions. It adds a little bit of resonance in here as well when it's doing that, so yeah, it's really nice. Then a side chain, it's quite tight, just to make sure there's no bleed over on the tail end of the sub, and then a limiter that's just doing a little bit of work to keep it just on the same volume the whole time, or at least close to it. Then we'll move on to our mid basses. The main mid bass is this one. And it's a very simple sound. It's coming from Serum, and it's really snappy. It's kind of psytrancey. There's a low end roll off, so on its own, it would have sounded like this without any processing. But I wanted to make space for the sub and the low end of the kick. And then I added one more bass on top of that. It's more just a textured bass. Also coming from Serum. This one, if I wanted this to be the main bass, I would have just not processed it at all. But it was a supporting layer to this, and I felt that really overpowered it without it having some EQ and stereo width. So I really brought it down in volume, and also added this kind of wonky looking EQ. It's a lot of dynamic EQing on this. You can see it working, and also the new spectral function in Pro Q4, which I'm a big fan of, and a bit of mid-side going on. So I've boosted the sides at F sharp 4, and these are all just frequencies that I felt were just interfering with the main bass. So I just wanted this to be kind of a textural layer behind the scenes. Plus I pushed it a bit to the sides with this plugin here. Stereo separation's at 46%, and then it's 4.6 milliseconds right. It's just a nice little trick. If I turn it off, you'll hear, just feels a little flat. Now there's just more life behind the scenes. Now, the actual processing on the mid-bass bus is really cool. I wanted to make sure that this roll-off was working dynamically because it just felt like some of the notes as it got lower were interfering with the sub. So I just have this, you can see it bouncing, boost on the mids at D sharp 5, and then a boost at D sharp 7 as well, just to get a little bit more snap out of the bass. As you can hear, without that boost versus with it, there's a lot more snap, and with the kick and sub I really needed that to cut through. Then we've also got Saturn doing a little bit of work. If I turn that off, you'll hear the difference. That sounds a lot more just like normal standard bass. That's got more shine, more snap, more groove. One knob filter doing the same thing as always, so I don't need to open that. Sidechain, and then one more EQ that actually dips at D#5, so I probably didn't need to do that boost on this at all. But yeah, that's the processing for that. And then after this, honestly, this part is probably the least interesting. We've got effects and percussion. And to be honest with you, I didn't really put that much work into the effects. It's just a lot of leaving the track on loop, letting it play, and just sorting through samples until the frequencies and tones just sit right to me. You know, I'll solo through them so that you can just hear what they sound like. But overall, it's very, very simple stuff. I've got some crashes. Well, that didn't work. Sorry about that. Let me unmute. Some reverses and crashes again. And then a riser. And it's kind of just doing the same thing throughout the whole track. And I think some people really overcomplicate the effects. You don't need to. They can just be a supporting layer that enhances the rest of the track. If you do want to do really creative stuff, by all means, go for it. My heart really lies with writing and composing, so the effects, excuse me, the effects for me are often kind of an afterthought, if I'm being completely transparent with you. But it's really just something that you need to kind of drive the track along and smooth out those transition points. So it is good to put enough thought into it that it's going to sound good, that the frequencies aren't clashing, but you don't need to worry too much about this. If you have a really good track already, you can add these in towards the end like I often do, and just make sure that it enhances the right moments and kind of hides the abruptness of certain transitions or enhances tension, but you don't have to overthink it. And I know a lot of people do, so I just wanted to be transparent about how little thought I gave those effects in this track. Now we're going to move into the percussion. This is also something that I kept quite simple. Now the clap is really nice and shiny. And that's actually to do with this processing. Without the processing, yes, it is bright, but it's got a lot of dynamic range from the point that the transient hits to the point that it ends. I wanted to make this just stick like on top of everything. So a great way to do that is this plugin. I use this on so much, and it's fantastic. And it's just great for claps, you know, you can see it working. I use it as an EQ, then it naturally compresses itself. You can get a lot of volume out of it. It's awesome. So with it, it sounds like this. Without it, it sounds like this. So I'll turn that back on. And then our EQ, I did a D#7 boost here, D#4 roll off. Without that, it sounds like this. With it, it just adds a little bit more punch. And then a one knob filter, which you could hear working already, that's filtering things down. The percussion itself is all just loops that just add on top of each other. You can obviously do the loops from scratch yourself, but there's so many great loops out there. I like to layer different loops together to create something new. So they kind of just build on top of each other. There's a bit of panning going on. One percussion loop is 30% right. The next is 25% left. The next is a little bit right. Next is a little bit left. And then they all get sent to the percussion bus, which this has some nice shaping on it. The shaping here, I have this dip specifically because I wanted this to carve out a little bit of space for the leads because they sit in this general range as well. But I also wanted the brightness to cut through the mix, so I boosted at just over 7,000 hertz. But without this EQ, you get a little bit more tone out of this area of the percussion, but less brightness. So you can hear how that's changed. The next plugin in the chain is this ARTG mastering chain. I use it often not on masters, but it is a fantastic plugin. It's got a great built-in limiter, great built-in stereo spreader, and a fantastic EQ that you can use in mid-side mode. I didn't do that this time, but it is great to use that way. And it's good for shaping and tonal balance and kind of keeping sounds in a general range of decibels with the limiter. It's just a nice tone. The recovery time is very useful to change this around and just see what fits. And then I have another maximizer, which is also keeping the volume in check again and potentially adding a little crunch. Let's see. Yeah, that kind of bulks up the sound a bit. One-up filter again, and then a sidechain just to take out that first section so it doesn't interfere with the transient of the kick or the clap. And then after that, the only other element in this track is this snare buildup. Which is pretty low in the mix. All right, this is the mixdown project for Mewali, which is the very final step of the project and where the final mastering settings have come in for this project. Now, this step maybe isn't always necessary, but I do find it helpful to bounce everything to audio, like I've done here, and just do the final like 1% this way. It's also best for me with mastering this way because I personally think the magic is in the mix, not the mastering. It can go the other way. I don't want to insult any mastering engineers out there. They do great work, and a lot of the time they are necessary. But for me, I'm very particular about what my tracks sound like, and I very rarely will outsource a master. I will work on getting the mix to sound as close to mastered as possible going into just a limiter, and then I'll make adjustments along the way with EQ, and then oftentimes, you know, I'll end up using mastering plugins on buses, which you already saw in the first part of the project. But my entire master chain, there's stuff that's muted. This is different every track, but usually it looks pretty simple. An EQ with a roll-off at 24 hertz or so in linear phase mode. Maybe some slight adjustments like this. Usually not. And a limiter. So that's it. There is actually a balance plugin, but this just does the exact same kind of automation that I showed you in the other part of the project, which just kind of rolls stuff down right before big impact points. And I just did that because I felt like I didn't do quite enough of it in the first part. I think that was because of how loud I was able to get the master, but it's been a little while since I finished this, so maybe there were other reasons, but whatever it might be, it's doing the same thing as before. Now, there's very little adjustment in this, but I also want to highlight here, if you look at the waveforms of each part of the track, the counterpluck has some variation. The leads, not so much. They're pretty blocky because they run into that limiter on their bus chain. You know, the pads are pretty obviously contained and controlled, same with the atmospheres. And you can see where things get louder very easily. The kick and bass is very, very stable. As you can see, piano, you can see the dynamic range. You can see everything. And that's kind of the point that I'm making here, is that if you ever see anything that seems like way off that maybe you didn't hear, and that can happen, you'll know when you bounce it to audio. And sometimes that thing that's off, usually I'd have my kick and my sub bass separate, but these days I already know how I like my kick and sub to sound, so I can always do that before the mix and bounce it as one audio file. But sometimes if you zoom in, you'll see like bleed over or like weird transient attack, and when you zoom in like this, you can actually see it. Maybe you couldn't hear that that's where an issue was coming from before, so that's another benefit to bouncing everything to stems. Now, before I talk all day about random music production topics and mixing topics that I'm so passionate about and have so much fun doing, I'm gonna actually show you all the little small details that finished this track for me. So we'll go to the mixer. All the processing is gonna be off when I press play. There's little volume adjustments, but that is to taste. And mixing for me is about where you want your focus points to be. Of course, you can do the mixing cheat sheets, you can buy the courses, you can do all of these things, and they're very helpful. But if you know where your focus point is or where you want it to be, and you listen to that and you shift to that first before going to what's technically or scientifically correct, sometimes you'll come out with a really, 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 really good result that you couldn't have gotten if you just listened to the so-called rules that are out there. Other times, though, sometimes those rules are helpful. So just use your best judgment, experiment if you're struggling with mixing, or, you know, reach out to somebody who offers kind of one-on-one stuff, or buy a course, and just find the things that you resonate with. It's all a learning process. I'll always be forever learning. And I love what I do, so it's all just fun for me. But we are going to get into the little things now. So if I press play without anything on, you can see it's kind of jumping up into the red here a little bit. But if I turn the master on, automatically louder and more bulky. Now that's a pretty obvious thing. Anyone's going to be able to hear that. But why is it that way? It's that way not because of this EQ, but this EQ I do feel is important. I roll off the lowest lows 9 times out of 10 on my mastering. You don't usually need anything below this. Sometimes, though, sometimes this can overdo it and you don't actually want to roll anything off. Sometimes it's rolled off in the project before. It just sounded better with this. Tiniest dip at A sharp 5, tiniest boost at G6. It's just kind of what felt like it needed to hit the limiter. I'm going to press play without the EQ so you can hear it before and after. It might not be very noticeable, but we'll see. I think it just shifts focus a tiny bit more to the tonalness of the atmospheres in the background rather than the brightness of the transient attack of the leads. You can still hear all of the things though, so maybe this sounds a little bit mad scientist to some people, but I'm very particular about how things sound in my tracks. Balance plugin, which I think I already went over this, but I've, full disclosure, done a few takes of this section, so I don't remember, just in case I haven't. It's doing the same thing as in the original project, dipping volume down before the main impact points. Next up is going to be the final thing in the chain, which is the invisible limiter. I love this plugin. If you don't have it, go buy it. It can handle a lot of input without distorting, but still use your ears and just make sure you're not pushing it too hard. A louder master is not always better. You just want it to get loud enough. This was loud enough for me. Next up, I'm going to go through and I'm going to turn on the individual bits of processing that went into this. And the only reason that there's any additional processing and volume adjustment on this is because when I did the mastering, which is so simple, I just felt like certain things were poking out a little bit too much or falling back a little bit, and that can happen. So it's good to bounce to stems before you master, in my opinion, because then if you ever hear like, oh, that hi-hat was just a little bit too loud, instead of going back and being like, oh, where in it is it, you just say, okay, well, it's hitting the limiter a little too hot. Now that stem just comes down by like 0.5 dB, or we dip that, that by a couple dB in an EQ, or whatever you choose to do. It could be compression. It could be more limiting. It could be anything. You can get creative. You don't need to be scared of that. So counterpluck stays the same. Leads came up in the mix a little bit. They used to be here. But now they're here. And though that sounds amazing, as I was doing other stuff, I felt like they had a little bit too much warmth, and I wanted the warmth to come more from the piano. So I did a little bit of EQing. And that EQ looks like this. So it's got a little boost on the 7th octave. All this got turned off. It was way too much. A little dip on the 9th octave. And then over here, I've got another roll off. I felt like there were little bits of boominess on certain sound systems. So I did that. On my headphones, it actually sounded probably better without that roll-off, so now I'm going to be second-guessing myself a little bit. But no, jokes aside, I think it can sound different on different systems, and it's good to check that. Check out of your phone, check out of your laptop, check out of old earbuds, and just see. because people aren't always going to be listening on good systems. So it's important to make sure that things shine, no matter the listening environment, which is why I do these extra steps, and where these kind of sometimes strange EQs come from is listening on different systems. So next up is the pads, and the pads, I'll solo those because these are more of a background sound. Before I processed them, they sounded like this. Now they sound like that. It's just a little bit softer. I rolled off some of the highs, or did a shelf on some of the highs rather, and then did a mid-side EQ. This is another thing where like it's all about mono compatibility. When you are mixing, at least, or producing, I mean, geez, I've done tracks that are entirely, I have it in mono for like 3 or 4 sessions. I only take it out to stereo towards the end sometimes because I want to make sure that it's mono compatible, because some systems are mono. So if things are too wide, it can kind of fall apart. And so some of these EQings, they're happening in mono. The pads definitely were. So I'll switch it to mono so you can hear the difference. Mono without the additional EQ. Mono with the additional EQ. And when I put the atmospheres in with their processing, that just fits. But if I turn off both processing, they're fighting at moments. But now they just glue, like kind of together in some frequency ranges and separately in others. It just gives space. And really, I credit that to mixing this in mono. So if you haven't tried that, do it. Next, I'm going to bring in the kick and bass. There is a tiny bit of processing on this. It's this boost. And you can hear that punch through a little bit more. Now it's off. Now it's on. You hear that kick just punch a little bit more. It just really helps for me. I felt like it needed that. Next up is the acids. The acids are, they should be playing at this point. Yeah. And that's with no additional processing. But now I'm gonna put processing on. They're probably gonna sound a little too low in the mix right now. And that's because they're sitting around the same frequency range as the leads. So I decided in mono, I wanted the leads to be obviously focused. So I should turn the leads on so that I'm explaining this in context. If you listen really closely, you may be able to hear what I was hearing when I was mixing this, which is that the acids and the leads just weren't quite talking to each other the way that I wanted. So let's listen with no processing on leads, no processing on acids. Now I'm going to turn the processing on. To me, it just feels like the acids are almost like underneath a blanket of the leads now, which is what I was going for. I didn't want them to be too forefront. I wanted them to be a very supporting layer. And then after that, I did some stuff on the percussion, but then I ended up re-exporting the percussion to have the clap separate, because originally they were all together in the stem, but I wanted to actually change some of the frequencies on where the hi-hats hit. So this is irrelevant, but the effects are still going to this. The effects have a little bit of EQ on them. Now, this was also done in mono, most certainly. So I'll just let this play with everything. Let's go back so you can hear one of the effects. That's with no processing. But now with processing, a tiny bit of clarity. I should loop this just on the moment that it crashes so that you can hear a difference. It just kind of softens it, which is what I was going for. Maybe it'll be more noticeable outside of context and not in mono, so I'll show you that. It almost kind of just tones it down a little bit, which I think I was looking for. I do that a lot with crashes. I don't want them to be like super intense a lot of the time. And then the only other things in this track that need to be shown are the additional processing on the piano, which is, I brought it up just tiny bit. And then this was a boost that was originally supposed to go on the acids, but it's a boost on the 7th octave for the piano. And you'll hear a difference here when I turn it on. Versus off. And also all those lows with the kick and the bass, that wasn't needed. Versus so you could hear, and I'll back up once more just so that you can hear it again, that if you listen really closely to the sub and the low end of the kick at the same time as when the piano's playing, when I turn this EQ on, you're going to hear more clarity and focus on that kick and sub. Versus when it's those low piano notes, it just feels like it's kind of taking away energy. But not with the EQ on. And I didn't really want to sidechain the piano anymore, so I just did EQ so that it wouldn't interfere with the low end. Now, the clap, I think I did do additional processing on the clap. I added a tiny bit of mid-side EQ. Again, this is because of mono compatibility, so in context, I'll press play again. Without it, it sounded like this. But with it, so it just cuts through. It just cuts through a little bit more. The percussion has a little bit of EQ on it as well. That's still the clap EQ. Did I copy it to this as well? Oh, no. Different for sure. This looks a little bit more wild. But let's see. What does this sound like without any processing? Okay, so that's where we were at before the EQ. With it, it just kind of shifts the focus point up here. It's kind of just shaping what little frequency points the ears are focused on. And that's really all that I was going for. Now, the very last couple things, I don't want anybody to think that I'm trying to hide something here because there's a few more little sounds. It's that I decided to add these reverse crashes and this little build-up loop. This wasn't fully my decision, actually. I mean, well, it is, but I wouldn't have thought of it if it wasn't for Rich. And when I sent him the track, he was like, hey, you've got these kick rolls. Maybe try something else. They're a little bit much. And he was absolutely right. So shout out to Rich. Thank you for not only the suggestion, but also for signing the track. I'm super happy to have it on Pure Trance. So the build-up originally had kick rolls into bar 33. Now it just has this beautiful little build-up section. And this is just kind of going on in the background, as you can hear, as I bring stuff in. That concludes the entire production and mix walkthrough of my new single, Mewali, which is out now on Pure Trance Neon. If you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much for sticking with me through all of the processing and mixing and mastering and all of my many words about this song and my process. I'm very grateful to have any viewership on this because I know that I needed this kind of thing when I was starting out. So I hope that you've learned a lot from watching this. And if you have any questions, you can send me an email at sequencesixstudios@gmail.com and we can chat. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you somewhere around the world very soon.